I'm Angelina, and I'll be your host today for today's symposium. So first, let me start with introducing what GYP is, what sort of a platform it is, and then we'll get into the actual part. So you guys can enter this link or like scan the QR code to like check them out. So basically, what GYP is, which stands for Global Youth Philanthropy. It's a nonprofit organization network registered independently in Massachusetts, California, and Canada since March 2020. And it's also a certifying organization for President's Volunteer Service Award. And GYP Boston specifically is the nonprofit partner of the Boston Government Youth Engagement and Employment Program. So from like all these little details, you can tell that GYP is a pretty prestigious program. And if you're like looking for many like service or like volunteering things that you want to like do or like to improve your application, then GYP would be like the perfect platform for you. It has many activities that you can choose from. So specifically, we'll talk about GYP Intercultural Forum, which is what we're doing today is also a part of. So what it is it's a platform that fosters inclusivity, diversity, and global awareness among the youth. And currently we're like looking for more students worldwide to join its like management team. So if you're like looking for something like it, we want to do like something interesting like that's related to like managing this forum, then you feel welcome. You can like welcome to like sign up so you can like join our team to learn more about it. And also you can earn like volunteering hours as well. So what GYP Intercultural Club is it's like a focused culture sharing group. So we've had like many symposiums in the past of people sharing culture on like Japan, the Middle East, and like many more. So if you want to like join the management team or you want to like share with your own culture, like about like your own culture and everything, then feel free to like contact us, contact the email, which I'll like go back to later. And yeah. So GIP Volunteer Award, it's the trademark of the GIP Volunteer Award and its logo. They're both like registered in the state of Massachusetts. And the applicants must be registered with GIP Boston at least 6 months in advance, and each candidate will have a mentor. And the GIP Volunteer Award candidates must send a GIP volunteering hour summary every 3 months. So if you want to be a candidate for this GIP Volunteer Award, then these are the things that you have to do. Like you have to like match basically. And this would be like this is an example of the certificate. This is what your certificate will look like, which looks very good on your resume as well. So this is a new club. This is a new introduced club, which is called Humanitarian and Research Club. And the members of GYP, this research club is guided by a professional advisory board, which is called the PAB. And then members of GYP and PAB, they include members of the Canadian Academy of Engineering and professors and researchers from Harvard University and many more. And then Girls for Change Initiative is the first project in the GYP Humanitarian Club, which we will get to later on by Tiffany. Yeah. And as I said, the topic today is a part of the intercultural symposium. And the panelists today, so specifically who will be like talking about it, will be me from like Muscat, Oman, Tiffany from Calgary, Canada, both Emily and Caroline from Boston. And the topic of today will be gender equality and feminism, which we find like really interesting. We're like all very passionate about this topic and we want to like talk more about it, and specifically like from a perspective from like our own culture. It's like what gender equality and feminism is like from our own culture. And now let's welcome Tiffany to introduce the Boston GIP Humanitarian Club.
All right, thank you. Let me just share my screen. Okay, so first I'm going to talk about the Humanitarian and Research Club. It's basically just like has two functions. First of all, we're going to be actively taking action to like trying to promote humanitarianism, and second, we're going to be doing some research. And essentially our goal is to actively engage students in the humanitarian field and cultivate the next generation of compassionate and dedicated humanitarians. So currently the Humanitarian Club and the Research Club is kind of one, but it's very likely that these two will split in the future and they will have their own separate goals and separate activities. So if you're interested, please, you guys are free to email JYP, or Angelina just showed a link in her presentation. So the first initiative in the Humanitarian Club is the Girls for Change initiative. So the mission essentially is to empower girls worldwide, especially in marginalized communities and those kinds of areas. So our first on-site partner is the North Thai Culture Education Foundation. So we're going to be trying to help the many girls who are in Thailand and our marginalized communities there. Our second partner, we're trying to negotiate with them right now, is the Rivers Foundation in South Africa. So hopefully we are able to connect with them and also try and help some of the girls there as well. Okay, so our humanitarian projects will be presented on the HNPW 2024. So hopefully you guys are able to tune into that as well. And Boston GYP will organize a session on virtual conference on HNPW. Okay, so this is our main platform, which is a University Surge Support Group. And there are about 60 humanitarian networks on HPNW. Individual organizations must be in one or more networks in order to arrange a session. And Boston GYP will run a session under USSA in 2024. And any students or parents who are interested in Boston GYP Humanitarian Club or its activities, you can feel free to contact us at the email below, which is info@globalyouthphilanthropy.org. I'll also put it in the chat if any of you guys are interested. So that's info@globalyouthphilanthropy.org. All right. Okay, so that's it. And I'm going to now go on to my presentation about feminism, which is like the main part of the presentation, which is the main part of this symposium. And let me just share my screen again. Okay, so for me, I'm just going to mainly talk about like what feminism is like in Canada, because I live in Canada and I've lived here for about more than 10 years. So I know mostly about how feminism and gender equality is in Canada. And I'm going to be talking a little bit about this later, but it is kind of similar to what's going on in the United States. So I'm going to be mainly highlighting some things that are unique to Canada, as well as the history of feminism in Canada. So what we're going to talk about today is I'm going to be introducing feminism. I'll talk to you about the history of feminism in Canada, and it's mainly split into 4 waves, and we'll go into that. And we'll talk about some current news and events that are relevant in Canada, like some issues that we're currently trying to solve. And we're talking about which ways that the Canadian government is seeking to expand in the future, and which ways the feminist movement in Canada is seeking to expand in the future in terms of gender equality. So the first thing, I'll talk about what feminism really means. So in a broader sense, feminism just kind of means a belief in the equality between the two genders. So basically just a belief in gender equality. So anybody who believes in this can be considered a feminist or can consider themselves a feminist. And whether this happens actually is up to debate. And some people have like disputed definitions of feminism, but in the general sense, it's just a belief in gender equality. So why is feminism necessary, and like why are we talking about all of this in the first place, right? So I feel like all of us have like understand that we live under like a very patriarchal society. So it's important that feminism supports women, and it's important that feminism supports men. So first of all, we're able to get greater opportunity for women because currently women are disadvantaged in terms of like career options and things like that. And we want to give them the same opportunity that men have. And we also want to promote justice and fairness in terms of things like how women are treated in the workplace and like how they're doing after they get jobs. And we also want to promote safety for women because a lot of the times misogyny can cause things like violence against women. And we also want to promote self-expression for both genders. And for men, mainly men suffer under the patriarchy because they're held to a very like toxic standard of like what they should be like, oh, they have to be like hyper masculine, for example. So it's very important that we're able to mitigate these kinds of toxic gender roles for men. So I feel like it's just like widely understood that women and men are both benefited under feminism. So a lot of the times feminism is very controversial because even though many people support the idea of gender equality, they don't consider themselves feminists because feminism has often become synonymous with like things that are generally negative because like, you know, sometimes people want to like preserve like systems that are going to impact women negatively, but sometimes people just don't generally understand what feminism really means because due to like a lot of things like the media, for example, feminism has been synonymous with like being anti-men or like being against men, which is just not really what it is. So that's why it's so controversial because people often view it as like women being against men, which is not necessarily what it is, because it is generally just for promotion of gender equality, which is why a lot of the times feminism is seen as like a negative movement. But I feel like generally the ideas of feminism are positive and can help our society. So I'm going to be talking about now the history of feminism in Canada. And generally, like the history of feminism in Canada is split into four waves. And what waves really means is just like a period of time in feminism where the ideology was relatively like consistent. So it's like the main four big like evolutions of feminism to like put it more like basically. Okay, so before we start, a lot of Canadian feminism is parallel to feminism in like the rest of the Western world. For example, like the US, the UK, and like Australia. They're all very similar countries. So a lot of the times what you see is that like a system or like a movement that is started in like one of these countries eventually spreads to all of the other countries as well. And typically, like Canadian feminism does echo the feminism in all three of these countries. But I will also be talking about a unique element, which is Indigenous feminism. So the first wave of feminism was from the 1800s to the 1900s. And the main idea that came out of this wave is suffrage, which is the right to vote for women. Because the suffragette movement, which is essentially like suffragette is like suffrage, but they like kind of feminized the word. So it's suffrage for women. And it began shortly after the Enlightenment. And essentially what the Enlightenment was a period of time where the Western world began to have very large ideological shifts. So people began to prioritize things like natural rights and liberty, and many women began to question their traditionally assigned gender roles. And this helped the emergence of many female philosophers, and it began in Europe, especially in like the UK, and spread to Canada because Canada was like a colonial holding at the time. So the suffragette movement helped women to gain the vote in Canada in 1917, and Nellie McClung and the Famous Five helped them to gain the vote in Alberta, which is where I'm from, so that's why I added her. But Manitoba was the first province to grant women the right to vote in Canada. So that was first wave feminism, which it was just mainly focused on the right to vote and legal rights because they didn't have that at the time. So now women weren't seen as like property, they were more seen as like people that could vote. Okay, so the second wave of feminism moved on to more social aspects of feminism. They began to stress more legal and reproductive rights. So they began to address things like such as the wage gap and like access to education. So still very basic rights that women were trying to get, and things such as like reproductive rights, access to contraception, and like legal abortion. So this is just mainly like women trying to get more rights for themselves under the law, and it was just a more social aspect compared to first wave feminism that was just about voting. And they also began to challenge traditional gender roles because they began to question a woman's role in family and society. And in the 1960s and 1980s, women were actually able to join the workforce. So they began to encourage the pursuit of careers for women so women could be more independent and just have more rights. And some notable Canadian figures include Doris Anderson, who was a prominent journalist at the time, and Judy Rebick, who was the leader of the National Action Commission for Women. And her group mainly sought to promote legislation that would help women and give women more legal rights in Canada. So third wave feminism focuses mainly then like on more popular culture critique, because by the 1990s and the 2000s, things like popular culture became very prominent, and a lot of the times women were not represented fairly under this media. So they called for more diversity and more positive portrayals of women instead of only portraying them as like stereotypes, for example. And a lot of women also began to create their own media, which was also very beneficial for a lot of women to be represented in this kind of media. And that's pretty much it for popular culture. A new ideology emerged in third wave feminism, which was choice feminism. So a lot of the times people agreed on what it meant to be equal to men, because like they wanted, either women wanted to be seen as the same as men, for example, like women becoming more like masculinized, but a lot of people disagreed and argued that like women should be seen as equal to men whether or not they are masculine, and like they wanted women to stop facing judgment for their choices. So ultimately what choice feminism comes down to is that women wanted women to not be judged for choosing to stay in traditional gender roles. For example, like if a woman really likes to cook and clean and like do traditional things that were assigned to women, she should not be judged for that, because that is something that she chose independently, and that's something that like people want to support her doing, for example. There are a lot of common arguments against choice feminism, which is that a lot of the times, like under patriarchy, women don't really have the freedom to choose what they want, and like they're often choosing things due to socialization. So choice feminism is still like widely debated today, but it did emerge in third wave feminism, where people were starting to consider more nuanced views of the women's role in society. So some notable Canadian examples was the women's marches in the early 2000s. This was also in the United States and like many other Western countries, but it spread to Canada and was especially prominent there. So I listed that in one of the main examples. So fourth wave feminism then is just like what you would consider to be modern feminism. So typically it's from 2012 to right now. So we are technically in fourth wave feminism. There is some debate about which wave of what wave of feminism we're actually in, but for the sake of simplicity, we are currently in fourth wave feminism, and ideological shifts are very common within these waves as well. So a lot of the things in the waves that I talk about was very general, and it's not what everybody believed at the time. It's just like what most women or most feminists believed at the time. So what was the most prominent in fourth wave feminism was the emergence of the Me Too movement. And so basically this was a movement where women came forward to share their experiences with like sexual harassment and like sexual assault. And it was a movement where like people became more vocal about their experiences, and people like women were trying to support each other in these experiences and hold the people that like harmed them accountable. And this was very important because it also emerged with things like online activism, because you notice how the Me Too movement is like hashtag Me Too, right? So that's something that's distinct to like online activism with like hashtags and stuff. And the Me Too movement spread very, very quickly because of the internet and like how quickly things can spread on the internet. So that was a very new thing for feminism, which was how fast activism is now because of the internet. And because of this, a lot of like a lot of people came forwards about different issues such as intersectionality and body positivity. So the thing with intersectionality is that people wanted greater emphasis on women of color and LGBT rights under the feminist movement, because a lot of feminists sought greater understanding of like the intersection between being a woman and also being a person of color, and how like different kinds of women face different kinds of oppression under the patriarchy. Because, for example, like a white woman's experience is going to be very different from a black woman's experience. And before, white women were very like overrepresented in feminism. So now people are starting to say like that they want representation for like women of color and also like LGBTQ women under the feminist movement, because those kinds of people experience very unique things with patriarchy, and they should also be heard and also be helped under the feminist movement. So the body positivity and beauty standards. A lot of women sought to reject traditional beauty standards, which is like a lot of things that like held women to like a toxic standard. For example, like a lot of women were expected to be like, I don't know, very skinny, or like they were expected to like be very curvy, for example. And like this caused a lot of insecurity with women, especially in the 2000s, where like people were taking a lot of Ozempic and there was a lot of negative beauty standards at the time. And there was a huge issue with eating disorders in the 2000s, which is why then the body positivity movement emerged to like help women with their body image and like try to help them to like accept their bodies and promote more healthy beauty standards. And then also emerged a contentious issue, which is still a thing that's debated today, which is body positivity versus body neutrality. So body positivity is essentially the idea that every single body part that a woman has or like that anybody has is beautiful, or that like that it is like attractive or desirable. And body neutrality stresses the idea that a body part doesn't necessarily have to be beautiful to be a valuable part of your body. So the main debate between these two is that body neutrality, people who believe in body neutrality argues that body positivity is still like promoting traditional ideas of beauty, or like the idea that something has to be beautiful in order to be valuable. And body positivity is just like so people can kind of accept their bodies. So typically it's understood that body neutrality is like a newer movement that emerged on the basis of body positivity, and different people believe in these things. Like sometimes they're like synonymous with each other, but a lot of the times like they have some their own nuances, and it's important to understand that and like kind of pick which one that you think is most beneficial for you. So the main thing that is then unique to Canada is Indigenous feminism. So Indigenous people are like a very unique marginalized community in Canada, right? Because Canada has like had many interactions with Indigenous people. We still live on Indigenous land, and in Canada, maybe you've seen like something like a land acknowledgement, where we will acknowledge that we live on traditional Indigenous land, and like Indigenous people in Canada also went through something called residential schools, which was a system of oppression that basically stole Indigenous kids from their families and placed them in schools for the purpose of like assimilating them, or for the purpose of taking away their culture. So many Indigenous women face negative stereotypes and suffer from generational trauma due to this, because like a lot of their grandparents or like their parents have been put into residential schools and have suffered under the Canadian system. So only now has the government began to make amends for these damages, and that's called the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in Canada. And basically it's a very like modern movement, and it's just starting out. Like they maybe started out in like 2019 or 2020. So there have been disproportionately many cases of Indigenous women disappearing in Canada, or like experiencing like extreme violence in Canada. And this especially highlights the importance of intersectional feminism and understanding how Indigenous women face a very unique experience under this, and like under the patriarchy and under systems that the government of Canada has set up before to specifically oppress them. So it is very important that in Canada, like people acknowledge that Indigenous people have been like uniquely harmed, which is why like the subject of Indigenous people is so important in Canada, and especially in Alberta. We try very hard to preserve Indigenous culture, with a lot of Indigenous events. So that's something that's like very unique to Canada, and yeah. Okay, so some current feminist issues that I would like to discuss. So there are three main issues that are very contentious in Canada right now. First is what is known as MMIWG, which is the missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. So basically, what's going on in Canada is that Indigenous women face a disproportionate rate of violence in Canada. They're more likely to be murdered, they're more likely to go missing, and they're more likely to face domestic violence. So it's something that is unique to them, and there's ongoing efforts to reduce harms and promote like prevention and awareness for these people. And a lot of the times on the internet, you can see people like talking about like their family members or like Indigenous women and girls that they know who have gone through this, and there has just been like an attempt to get more awareness about this in Canada. The second thing is reproductive rights. So a lot of politics in the US bleeds into Canada very significantly. So the abolishment of Roe v. Wade in the United States raised a lot of questions in Canada. And as of now, Justin Trudeau, who is like the Canadian Prime Minister, has reiterated his stance that reproductive rights must and will be protected in Canada. So because of this, there's a lot more like emphasis on reproductive rights in Canada, and the Canadian government right now is just saying like they're not going to change their stance on abortion, and they're going to allow women to get like safe and legal abortions in Canada. But it did become like an issue of contention, because like because of how politics in the United States really influences politics over here. So the next thing is intersectionality. Okay, I wrote WOC, and that stands for Women of Color. Especially Indigenous women have taken a much bigger focus in Canada because Canada is like a super diverse country, and we have a lot of like different kinds of people. There's greater discussion of colonial legacies and cultural preservation in Canada. So people are now starting to think about like what happened in like the colonial era, where like the British people were like trying to establish like residential schools, for example, and trying to talk about like how did that impact the current society? And that is a main thing that's very contentious in Canada, especially with the Truth and Reconciliation Commission that the government started recently. It is very important now to discuss like the legacies of colonialism and like how we can move on from those legacies and make sure that we have a more progressive future in Canada. Okay, so the last thing we're going to talk about is future feminist directions. So basically, what is Canada looking forward to expanding in terms of feminism, right? So I talked about this, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. This is basically like a movement that the government created to make amends with Indigenous people. So what they would do is a lot of the times they'll talk to Indigenous people, they'll give like reparations to Indigenous people, and the Canadian government has publicly apologized many times to Indigenous people for the things that the Canadian government did to them in the past, for like residential schools and like treaties and like zoning them and things like that. Um, the TRC is like a very good effort from the Canadian government to make amends. We have yet to see genuine like a genuine impact that this has made because it's a very like new kind of thing. So Canada is really hoping that things such as truth and reconciliation can raise more awareness for Indigenous people and just like really help them to get back on track after like what the Canadian government did to them. So the next thing is diversity. So there's a greater emphasis, of course, for women of color in feminism and promoting their ideology and their voices. So before it was just like a lot of feminism was like white women or like privileged women speaking on their experiences, or they were speaking for women of color. But now what we're trying to do in Canada is that like we want to promote women of color speaking for themselves and advocating for themselves so people can get more awareness and see how it is to be a woman of color and create more understanding. The next thing is ideology. So this often includes taking down double standards that are there for men and women, so we can benefit both men and women and promote gender equality. And other ideologies are now included in feminism, which is things like environmentalism. So there's a lot of like environmental feminism and things like that. So these movements are starting to become more and more combined, and people are starting to identify with more like niche or like specific sects of feminism. Okay, so the next thing is just on general like rights. It is still important that like the Canadian government preserves things such as reproductive rights and like amending the wage gap and promoting women's safety in Canada. So what's going on here is that like the Canadian government is much more like solid in its stance on women's rights. It's saying that like we will protect reproductive rights, we will promote women's safety and things like that. So there's a lot less debate on like the rights of women in Canada. It is very generally agreed upon that women should have reproductive rights. So even if you are like a conservative in Canada, you still like technically believe in like women's rights and like these kinds of things in terms of feminism. It's just that like conservatives and liberals in Canada disagree on other things. They typically all agree that women should have reproductive rights and we should promote women's safety. So that's pretty much it for my presentation. We're actually going to save questions like the Q&A session for the end of the symposium, but for now, I'll call upon Carolyn and Emily to like do their discussion. Thanks, guys.
Wait, sorry. I think Tiffany got the order a bit wrong. I'll go now. I'll go
Oh,
first,
okay.
and then it's Carolyn and then Emily. Sorry for the confusion. Let me share my slides. Tiffany, can you see the slide?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so my name is Angelina and I'm gonna be talking about like feminism and gender equality, especially in Oman. And in case you're wondering what Oman is, where it's located and everything, I'll talk about it. I'll get to it. So first, this is a table of content. So I'll introduce like Oman, like just a brief overview of like Oman's culture, Oman's history and everything. And then I'll go on to the historical perspectives. So like in the past, what are the historical roles like um of like women in Oman, and then I'll go on to the legal framework, which is like sort of like currently like how like the legal status is of like women in Oman, and I'll get into the laws a bit. The language might be a bit confusing, so I'll like explain them after. And then I'll talk about the cultural and social norms. So these are like pretty much like stereotypes and everything that women face with these norms, and yeah. So in terms of geographical location, Sultanate of Oman, which is also often referred to as Oman, is located in the southeastern part of the Arabian Peninsula. And then this is the globe. You can see like Oman's the little green part. Um, it's pretty big. So Oman has a tropical desert climate, and there are usually two seasons, either summer or autumn. So we don't have spring or winter. Yeah. And the hot season is from May to October, with the temperature reaching above 40 degrees Celsius, which is 105, I believe, degree Fahrenheit. And then the cool season is from November to April, which is with an average temperature being around 24 degrees Celsius, which is around 75 degrees Fahrenheit. So these two temperatures are like what we usually like face throughout the year. And then in case you're wondering, this is how our flag looks like, and then this is our national emblem. Okay. And I'll talk about some specialty that we have in Oman. So first we have the frankincense, which is a peculiar tree fragrance that heals by itself and heals the whole tree and from the tree. So it is a
Hello, Angelina, can
Can
you
you hear
I
hear?
me?
think she might be experiencing some like internet issues.
Okay, maybe we let Caroline or
Can you
Emily talk while we wait.
wait, can you hear me now?
Okay,
Where was I, by the way? When
so
I
my
think
we're
the
talking about,
specialties.
yes.
Okay, yeah. Sorry. Okay, so we have the frankincense. Sorry guys about that. So first we have the frankincense, which is a treatment that can be used for like digestion and healing properties. So a lot of locals like to use them. So especially like after a really severe injury or like after like an operation or everything, frankincense is like the perfect healing source. And then we have the date palm. Like these trees are like grown literally everywhere. Like I have one right outside my house. They're really nutritious and rich, and they also contain a variety of vitamins, proteins, minerals, and other nutrients, and have been regarded as a good, nourishing, and nutritious food since ancient times. So it has been going on for a really long time. And then we have the traditional Omani mashit, which is called the khanjar. It used to be a weapon, but then it evolved to an ornament. And then depending on like your status, like whether you're in the royal family or you're just like a local citizen, the style is like extremely different. So like for example, people from the royal family, they'd have like gold jewelries or like just like gold like carved around the khanjar, but then local citizens, they like have something completely different, like probably just like some basic silverware or something. Okay, now let's get to the actual part of like the historical perspectives. So maybe you're not even surprised, but traditionally women in Oman, they were like primarily responsible for like managing household duties, including cooking, cleaning, and caring for children, also known as housewives. and they often played a role in maintaining family traditions, passing down cultural values, and ensuring the well-being of the family unit. So in terms of education wise, they were like pretty much just like educating their own child on how to like have good manners and how to grow up as a good child instead of like just like messing around and everything. And then, especially in rural areas, women were actively involved in agricultural activities such as planting and harvesting crops. And then women also engage in traditional crafts, producing items like textiles, pottery, baskets, contributing to the family's economic well-being, which is why that tradition has been passed down generations and generations. So even till this day, if you go to like a village in Oman, a village like anywhere in Oman, you'd see like a lot of local Omani women just like selling out like handmade crafts and everything. Yeah. And also historically, educational opportunities for women were very, very limited, and education was often informal and focused on cultural and domestic skills instead. And then women were often involved in traditional healthcare practices using herbal remedies and traditional healing methods, such as the frankincense. And they played a role in caring for the sick within the family and community. And we all know, like with this, like for example, with the situation in Afghanistan, like educational opportunities, like women cannot have access to education over there. Even in modern society, that is still going on. So this issue is like pretty prevalent even in like modern society. Okay, now I'll go on and talk about like the laws and legislation in Oman about women. So a lot of them is like in very, very formal language, but I'll explain like in detail of like what these laws mean. So Oman's personal status law, which is what I'm going to be referring to a lot, basically they restrict the right of the child's custodian, normally the mother, to travel abroad with the child without the approval of the guardian. So what it essentially means is that um normally a child wouldn't be allowed to travel alone, only if their guardian is like like their dad, who's like signed off the form that, oh, like they can travel alone and everything. If it's a like mom who signed it off, then it wouldn't work. Like they're not gonna pass it, they're not gonna agree. Only if like it's their dad who signed it off, which is like, I think it's pretty common everywhere. And then the guardian obviously must be male. And then also in terms of marriage and divorce, the personal status law requires the husband to maintain the wife. So the wife owes obedience to the um husband. A husband can divorce by repudiation. So a husband can like choose to divorce at any time, but then a wife has the right to divorce only in like specific grounds, like such as like she can like apply for like a divorce without grounds if she forges financial rights. So for example, if there's evidence that the husband cheated or something, then like that's the only case where she can like get a divorce. But otherwise, they're like women have no right to like get a divorce here. And then Oman's personal status law also grant women the right not to be like physically or emotionally abused by their husbands. However, mental rape is not criminalized by Oman's penal code, and women who report rape can be charged with having sexual relations outside of marriage if they do not win their case. So, for example, if women in Oman, they're like, oh, like my husband, like, oh no, if women in Oman, if if someone raped a woman, in like a local Omani woman, then and they choose like to go on court with and everything, if they do not win their case, then the woman herself is going to get charged for having sexual relations outside of marriage. And then the personal status law also defines the rules of inheritance, which follow the Sharia principles, which is one of the sort of like one of the royal family. And then women have a right to inheritance, but in many cases receive less than male, and daughters receive half the share that sons receive. That's like pretty straightforward to understand. And Oman has no domestic violence legislation, so abortion is prohibited, like including for women who have been raped. So if you've been raped and then you like have a child by accident, then you still like abortion is still prohibited. So you have to like fly elsewhere, and there is no legal prohibition. Next, I'll talk about the cultural and social norms of women in Oman. So modesty in dress, it's like it's highly valued, especially in Omani culture. So women typically wear traditional clothing such as the abaya, which is a loose-fitting black cloak, and a headscarf, which is also known as the hijab. And this reflects a cultural emphasis on maintaining modesty and respecting Islamic values, which is Islam, it's like is the religion that many locals practice here. And in terms of gender segregation, traditional gender segregation is often observed in public spaces. So even till this day, gender segregation is still going on with separated areas for men and women in certain social settings, such as mosques and some public events, which makes sense. Especially in mosques, like when you want to like pray and stuff, usually men and women are separated. But then also in some educational institutions, especially at like higher levels, or like even in public schools in Oman, there may be gender segregated classrooms or facilities. This practice is often justified as a means of fostering a focused learning environment and adhering to cultural expectations. However, like a lot of the public schools that I know of that in Oman are like completely like separated. So like girls go to a public school specifically for girls, and guys go to a public school specifically for guys. And if they ever want to like emerge, then girls and boys would like still study in separate classrooms. Yeah, and then I'll talk about the marriage and family life. So marriage is often viewed as a significant milestone, which is also very prevalent in like many other countries. And social expectations may include an emphasis on family life. So women may face societal pressure to marry and fulfill traditional roles as wives and mothers. Even till this day, a lot of women themselves see themselves as, oh, like the whole point of me growing up is to become a housewife. This is like a lot of their like mentality here. But overall, I like the most important thing is like the religion, which is why a lot of women think this way, and a lot of like laws are like this. It's because of the religion, which is Islam. It plays a really, really significant role in shaping the cultural norms. And Omani society often aligns with Islamic values and principles, impacting aspects of daily life, family dynamics, and social interactions and everything. So overall, the religion Islam is like what like shapes women's mentality and like what made them this way. And then also a lot of the laws and legislations here is like shaped around the religion. So yeah, that's all I have for today, and let's move on to Caroline and Emily.
Caroline, I think if we were to go in alphabetical order, you would
Wait.
speak first.
All right, can I trouble you to share a screen then?
Yeah, of course. Give me 1 second. Wait, before that, do you want to move the first slide that we have down, or do you want to get straight into that?
We can just leave it there.
Okay. I'm gonna wait, Caroline, are you able to share screen? Because I do need to take notes.
All right, I hope everyone can see my screen. And today, Emily and I will be talking about gender and equity from a US perspective.
Wait, give me 1 second. Everyone who's in the audience right now, can I just get a quick gauge of what grade you're in? So if you could put in the chat, like, what grade you currently attend, just so we know who our audience is.
All right, while that's going on, Emily, you want to talk about the first slide?
Yeah, sure. So recently, Caroline and I are going to talk about the perspective in the United States. And we're going to cover some things or news that have been popping up in the United States concerning feminism. So for us, feminism is literally ingrained into society because we are women. So we experience it every single day. And what happened in September of 2023 was that news broke out that there were menstrual products, or the products that women use for their periods, were actually underperforming, meaning that they could not hold as much blood as they were advertising to. Because what the companies were doing was that they were testing the products with saline, and saline is a very different solution from blood. It's basically like a mixture of water and some other chemicals used to mimic blood. But because it wasn't tested with actual blood, the products that the women were using or have been using for the past decade or so were underperforming. However, there has been some progress made because the Ohio State University has been testing their menstrual products with blood for the first time. So this is one modern example of how feminism is improving in marketing.
Emily?
And now I imagine that a lot of you are going into STEM, or because of many of the values that our parents hold, we are being told to go into STEM. So in this case, I wanted to talk a little bit about the STEM field. What has happened is that because of disparities in history of women receiving less education, more practical fields such as STEM have had less of a female audience. So there has been a disparity between how much women are in the STEM field versus how many men are in the STEM field. Okay, basically, this is saying that there is a power imbalance between women in the STEM field who are less established and men in the STEM field. Now, obviously, there's lots of women who are very successful, but especially in STEM or other disciplines involving sciences, there have been 3.4 times as many reports of sexual assault or harassment. And this is not a coincidence, because in 2018, the National Academics of STEM, or NASM, they held a report where they basically polled everyone in the STEM field who was a woman. And they found that 50% of women in science and 58% of women in academia and nearly 43% of all women in STEM fields reported sexual harassment in their workplace. So going back to what Tiffany said, this is also what is happening in one specific field, especially a field that a lot of us right here are planning on going into.
All right. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about disparities in public speaking, specifically in regards to the workforce. So in general, female voices are taken less seriously than men in the workforce, as feminine voices are given less credibility. Women are often written off as emotional when they try to express their opinion, whereas when men raise their voice, it's seen as a form of authority. In modern times, you might have seen the word vocal fry thrown around. And this is a word to describe a way of speaking in which the voice is very low-pitched and has a rough or creaking sound. This happens in the lower registers of the voice, and here is like a spectrogram where you can see the difference between, this is the sound wave of a voice that's speaking regularly, and then here is the addition of when someone's doing vocal fry. And so this word has garnered attention in recent years because it's thought to be used by women, especially young American women, to imitate men and achieve credibility in the workplace. Because since feminine voices are seen as less credible, it's thought that women will lower their voices in order to imitate men to obtain the same level of credibility. The issue with this is that it's seen as annoying. A lot of people find that women who do vocal fry actually have less credibility than without, because it's seen as harsh and grating, and overall it just decreases their chances of getting hired in the workforce. But the issue is that this isn't always intentional. Vocal fry is a normal vocal phenomenon that has existed for decades. And there's only increased attention now because some people, in particular men, and in particular men of authority who are conducting these interviews, find it as annoying and uncredible. Vocal fry happens at the same rate in men and women because it is a normal linguistic phenomenon, but only women are disproportionately criticized for it. And here's a graph of like men doing vocal fry and women doing vocal fry and how it affects different characteristics like trustworthiness, competency, education, etc. And so here we see that even on the basis of female voices, women are still disproportionately affected by the same linguistic phenomenon, and it shows how pervasive feminist ideas go. But let's see how this plays a part in academia, and also in our schools.
Okay, so Caroline and I both do debate, or at least we both used to do debate. I got out of there, but I'm still in the debate circuit and I do speech now. So originally in I think the National Speech and Debate Association was founded somewhere in like the 1920s, but basically it's this national competition that branches out into smaller qualifier competitions that basically builds up this entire debate circuit, we like to call it. You can think of it as like an electrical circuit where everybody's connected in some way or another because you're all competing in the same tournaments. Now, we have had some pretty interesting experiences. But I think Caroline and I have been lucky enough that we did not debate for a very long time before I stopped debating, that we did not experience personally any sort of gender bias in terms of judging. But basically how debate works is that there is a judge and there are two competitors. In our case, it was a partnership debate, so it was 2 versus 2 and then one person to judge. If you get to higher levels, the judge will be more qualified. But even so, some judges will have biases against their competitors. Although it is although the speech circuit has tried to fix this, because when you get to elimination rounds or more serious rounds, or even just rounds at like a higher level tournament, you will have many judges to judge you. So you won't get screwed over by one bad judge. But here's an experience that one of our former debate, I'm not going to say their name, but one of our former debate members had in a round. Next slide, please. So this was at the Harvard National Tournament, where basically schools flew in from Florida, from Canada, from California, and people were competing in an event. In this case, we were talking about our experiences with how badly the tournament was ran, because even though Harvard is super prestigious, there are still issues that their judges have. And in this case, our former member had an experience where they ran into a judge that basically never voted for a girl team when they were going up against a guy team. Now, how do we know this? Because on the website that hosts the debate, that basically that tells you who you're going against, and you can see who your judge is, you can see their judging history. And judging history is who they have judged in the past and who they have voted for. Basically, he has never voted for a team that was 2 women when it was against a team of 2 guys. So what does this mean? Now, there could be a very small chance that all the girl teams that went against the guy teams that he judged were genuinely on a lower level. However, this judge specifically had a very extensive judging history, which meant he judged a lot of rounds. And the chances that the team of girls were consistently performing or underperforming than the team of guys is pretty low. Now, there was a paper published 2 years ago by somebody on the debate circuit that basically highlighted that women were indeed getting voted for less than teams of just male debaters, which is another piece of evidence for gender bias in the debate circuit. And I think Caroline could actually speak more on this, because there's a reason why women in speech and debate are sometimes undervalued, and it has to do with voices and traditional gender roles. So Caroline, do you want to speak on that?
Sure. So I'm going to preface this with a little anecdote, which is that a couple years ago, Emily and I were at this debate camp called Lumos. And the reason why I bring this up is because I recall very vividly that when we were doing a debating drill, this older female debater who already graduated, went to college, was running the drill with us in a side room, and she basically gave us a bit of advice. And she told us that when we walk into a debate round, and if we see that our opponents are 2 men, we shouldn't be afraid, we shouldn't immediately be scared, and that we should stand our ground and try our best. And basically, I remember this conversation because she told us that in general, women are seen by society as quieter. They're seen as not loud enough, so when a girl goes into debate, they're usually told to project. They're told to speak louder, they're told to stand up straight, and they're told to not be afraid. This is because loudness is often equated to credibility, which is why when a man has a loud voice, you can see this in politics and debate, they're seen as more credible. But the issue is that when women When women, on the other hand, raise their voices, they're seen as too emotional. And so this is why women can't really win no matter what they do. If they're too quiet, then they're seen as insecure. If they're too loud, then they're seen as too aggressive. And so this has been reflected time and time again in the debate space, because a lot of the women that I'm friends with, I'll speak to them and they'll be like, the judge wrote in my feedback that they didn't vote for me because I was too emotional. Emily, do you want to add on to that?
Yeah, I was trying to tell you to stop sharing your screen. I think that's a very good sum up, because actually I don't have much to add. I think that was very perfect. All right, in essence, that is also the end of our presentation, and thank you for listening.
Thank you, Tiffany, for sharing your perspective on Canada and like all the waves. And thank you, Caroline and Emily, for sharing your own personal experience. That was very insightful. Yeah, so thank you guys so much for attending this symposium, and I hope to see you guys next time.
Are we taking questions?
Oh yeah, does anyone have any questions? Sorry.
All right, if no one has any questions, can I take some questions? Like, can I ask questions?
Yeah, we can ask each other and everything.
All right, so Tiffany, I was really interested by your discussion on like the different waves of feminism. So I was wondering, do you think feminism will make another shift or wave in the future, or do you think that we've come close enough to gender equality that it's not necessary?
Well, obviously, like, I feel like we're still pretty far from like true gender equality, because a lot of legacies of like, like we're still living in a patriarchy, and like feminism continues to be a very contentious issue, right? What I think is that like the waves of feminism mainly served to like show how feminism has evolved. And while I do think that like feminism is going to continue to evolve, I feel like because of like the internet, it's going to be much more difficult in the future to kind of like define it in like a very specific wave, because like there's not going to be more like there's not going to be as rigid of like an ideology connected to different waves anymore, because before, like in history, it was like like it was like feminism was still developing, which is why like they like thought of different ideas every once in a while. But now I feel like we've reached a point where like you can't really define feminism by like a certain ideology anymore, because there's so many different people that believe in different things. It's very hard to define everything in one certain wave, especially now there's like so many different branches of feminism too. So it's very hard to kind of like just throw everything in one wave of feminism. So while I do think feminism is going to continue to evolve, I don't think it's going to be easy to just like put it all in one wave. So like I don't know, it's kind of like a yes and no.
Oh my God, well, I think that's really interesting and it's very insightful. All right. So Angelina, my question for you is, I was wondering, so you talked a bit about feminism in Oman, so I was wondering how like you were interested in that, or like if you're like visiting there right now.
Wait, the way you asked me sounded like a debate thing. But so I've been living in Oman for like over 11 years, and I'm like pretty familiar with like the current situation and everything. And also like what initially got me interested was like when I was doing, it's also like part of GIP's thing where like the intercultural forum thing, and I was sharing about my about like Oman's culture and everything. And then someone from like during my Q&A session, someone asked me, oh, like how's women's situation in Oman and everything. And I felt like really unprepared. I was like, oh, I've been living here for like over 10 years and I don't know like what like the situation is. And that like got me really interested. So then I started like researching and like studying and digging and everything. I think there's someone in chat. For the social norms for women, are they similar in other Muslim countries in the Middle East? I feel like they're pretty similar in terms of like how like the social norms are, and especially like the whole housewife idea. I feel like even in like modern society, it's pretty like normal here, especially in the Middle East. It's like really different elsewhere, but in the Middle East, it's like the housewife idea and everything. It's like pretty normal. But there are some like specific cities or like countries, like for example the UAE or like Dubai. It's pretty international, and then a lot of people have like a pretty like international open mindset. But then for a lot of countries like Oman, especially like Saudi Arabia, who's like very like conservative, who's like very like, you know, like very into the religion, then it's like a completely different story. Yeah.
I have a question for Caroline. I know you're my presenting partner, but I think I'm still confused about something. So when you talked about vocal fry, so how do women successfully like deepen their voices, and why, like, do you know how much this occurs, or like in which field specifically? Because it seems like, I don't know, because it seems like it seems like the way I talk, like obviously I don't talk very deeply, but I don't experience like the need to deepen my voice in any circumstance. Maybe it's because I'm not like the president of somewhere, but when do women need to do this? And like, where is the most prevalent that it began to be seen as annoying?
All right, sure. So in terms of when do women see the need to do this? Well, on to some level, it's more of a subconscious thing, and most of the time when it happens, it is like subconscious. Like they're not actively trying to deepen their voice. And there's a small bit of time when they do deepen their voice for credibility, and that has to do with a linguistic phenomenon called code switching, when you like, try to mirror how you talk to kind of mirror the other person in the situation. So like in an interview with a man, since men generally have a deeper voice for like various social reasons and also physical reasons, a woman might want to like deepen her voice to kind of mirror, just subconsciously change her manner of speaking in order to, so that they're like speaking in the same fashion. What was the second part of your question? Oh, like when it became annoying. It became annoying, like when women started doing things like radio broadcasting, and so that's when a lot of people really started to notice. But like, of course, people noticed, like in the 1900s, where it was called a Valley Girl voice. But more recently, there's so much attention just because there's social media, the prevalence of social media, and we can, I guess, hear more female voices.
That's really interesting. Okay.
Yeah, I've never heard of like that. But wait, I also have a question for you guys, because you guys talked about like the whole like vocal idea and everything. Like it's a bit personal, but like do you guys like purposely like deepen your voice like during debate rounds, or like have you like heard other, because I know you guys are like done research on this thing, but like have you heard other people, like especially girls, like purposely like deepen their voice to like sound more credible when you are like going against them or like something like that?
Oh my gosh. Okay. So I've generally had pretty bad experiences against like teams that are like both boys when we're debating against them, because I remember one round we were at Princeton in New Jersey and we were debating against this other team. They were very good, admittedly, but they were also it was a lot of like um it was a lot more of like volume that they brought up, even though they were very good. But I think it was a lot of like volume and just aggressiveness. But I feel like even in that case, we never felt the need to deepen our voice, because frankly, it is kind of inconvenient to do that when you're speaking like a lot, because in a debate round, you're obviously trying to get a lot of arguments in. So I don't think I've deepened my voice, unless Caroline has noticed, but I know Caroline doesn't listen to my speeches.
I listen to your speeches, Emily, but I think that I sometimes deepen my voice, like I just like can't control it. It's just something that happens. And like I know that personally I feel more comfortable in like the lower registers of my voice. And so like when it happens, sometimes I'll make a mental effort to raise my pitch. But I think it like does happen, especially if I'm talking to someone who has a naturally lower voice.
Oh, I also want to jump in on this. I also do debate like in Canada. I know like debate in Canada is like very different, but I feel like I'm somebody has like a lower than average voice, like for girls. And like what happens here is that like people have this thing where that they call like their like debate voice. And so like some people will actively like switch their voice when they debate. I also think it's like a subconscious thing, so it might not be like they're doing it on purpose. But a lot of girls when they debate, like they won't make their voice lower, but they do get like more aggressive. So like I guess in a way it's like also a thing that they do. Also with voices, it's like I think a lot of like I don't know like people see it in like China or like in other countries, but like in the West, it's like sometimes girls will make their voices higher so that like guys will like them more. Which I think is funny because like, you know, it like goes the other way too.
And the thing is, during debate rounds, Caroline has seen me yell during debate rounds because like if the other team is being super aggressive, okay, look, you're not supposed to be super aggressive, which is why I don't, because like you can either be aggressive in your language or you can be aggressive in the way or your volume. So usually I don't like being aggressive because that often translates to being mean in my speech. So instead I raise my volume. And it's like I know a lot of judges do not like that because you're trying to keep the debate at a reasonable level. But sometimes it's also just like I wouldn't even know that I'm yelling until I finish. And I'm just like, wow, the room just got really quiet because I was yelling. And I think that also plays into how unconscious vocal fry or just how you're talking is. But Claire's question, okay, she
Oh,
asks, how
okay.
do you girls like the Barbie movie?
I Okay, I have like a very like I have a kind of like a mixed reaction about the Barbie movie because I do think it's good that like you're putting like feminism in media, obviously, because it's like okay, well now we have more representation for women, and like the Barbie movie had like a gigantic budget, right, and it was super successful. So for this, I think is good because like now this means that there's going to be more feminist media, and it also proves that feminist media can be successful, and it also kind of just allows like women and girls to express themselves. But I also do think that the Barbie movie has a very like unnuanced view of feminism. It's like the most palatable version of feminism that like a film could possibly be, and like it's very clear that like a lot of it was just like them trying to make money. So in terms of representation, it isn't bad. I do like that they make this movie, but obviously there's many different ways that they can make it like more feminist, if you know what I mean, because the Barbie movie was more of just like a marketing thing for Barbie. So yeah.
Yeah, I agree with her point. Like I feel like I don't know, it's a bit odd after like it's just a bit odd because like I feel like they're like promoting this like as like a pink world, like very like feminism and everything, but then when you like actually like after you finished watching it, you're like you just like sort of think to yourself like yeah, there's a bit of feminism inside, but then at the same time like the way they portrayed it was like not the way that like like the way that feminists would like portray feminism, like you know what I mean. Yeah.
Yeah, but I also don't think like the way a lot of people reacted to it was like good, because a lot of people were just like, oh, like this movie is all about like hating men and like this movie is terrible. But so it's like I do defend the Barbie movie against like people who like say it's terrible and like everything sucked. But like I also do think it wasn't like the best that it could be. So what do you guys think? Like Emily and Carolyn?
So we haven't we did not get to watch the Barbie movie.
Oh, okay.
I've heard a lot of the latter point that you mentioned, which was like the negative backlash. And I feel like that honestly was kind of expected coming different interpretations of a movie that various people have. But yeah, I will go watch it and I will get back to you.
Especially in the US, I think a lot of like people like Ben Shapiro had a very like animated reaction to it. I know that. And like a lot of like Republicans in the US have been talking about it too. I think politics in the US has really turned into like identity politics now. I think it's like, you know, you could really see that with like them attacking the Barbie movie, but not like Oppenheimer for some reason.
That's very true. Okay. Does anyone else in the audience have any questions? Okay.
Okay.
I'm guessing that either somebody is typing up a question or they have no questions. So in that case, where is, okay. Mr. Wong, do you have anything else you would like to say as a conclusion, or are we allowed to end the meeting?
Excellent event. That's all. Thank you. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you all for coming.
Thank
Okay,
you.
thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.